Ambassador Kumaran, the Ambassador of India to the Philippines. Welcome to the Manila Times Roundtable, and welcome to Manila. I heard that you had just arrived. We're interested in talking about Philippine-India relations, but sir, maybe before we start the questions, you can give us a brief overview about the status of our country's relations.
Well, thank you for this opportunity once again. I believe that the India-Philippines relationship is at a takeoff point. We have had very good relations in the past. Of course, our relations are very ancient and civilizational. We had trading and cultural links, spiritual links for millennia. But of late, in the 20th century, we of course supported each other as we sought to craft our own nationhood. And we sought inspiration from each other. Our leaders understood each other, spoke to each other. So there was a lot of correspondence. Subsequent to that, of course, for some periods during the I would say during the Cold War in particular, I think the intensity and the richness of contact was not as much as we would have liked. Both Prime Minister Modi and President Duterte, who've met each other a couple of times, and the Prime Minister has also visited the Philippines. I believe that they share a very good understanding of the nature of the political processes underway in our region and in the world. And so they understand the logic and the strategic framework in which this relationship is developing. I think the Philippines is a very important player in Asia, in the region, and India would surely like to upgrade its partnership, both politically, in terms of security, in terms of defense, in terms of economic cooperation, development partnership, in terms of cultural and people-to-people exchanges, science and technology, new areas that are emerging, the digital economy. So it's a very solid basis for our relationship, a very strong political determination to take it forward, a wide-ranging, multifaceted partnership. And I personally find, after coming here, some of the characteristics of the Philippine economy and the Indian economy, they match each other well. I found, for instance, that you're also very services dominated. So is India. On the healthcare sector, because that is now in focus. Again, India is a very interesting partner for the Philippines. We are currently the largest supplier of medicines. And we have we're very proud of the fact that Indian medicines have made pharma accessible, especially for people suffering from chronic ailments, made it accessible and affordable. So there's a very wide range. And I think that at the bottom of it, as democracies, we have shared values and we have a lot of people-to-people connections and friendships, which is what, to me, makes it a very special and to me also a very promising relationship for the future.
Ambassador, Prime Minister Modi and our President Duterte have both been described as strong leaders. In fact, they've also been criticized for it. But maybe for those who don't understand India very well, maybe you can explain why some media have also been calling President Modi as a rock star leader. What is the background there? I mean, it's quite fascinating how he's given that celebrity status as well.
Well, I think the appeal primarily arises from a record of governance in the case of the Prime Minister. He has been consistently seen when he was Chief Minister of the state and in his time as Prime Minister. He has been really focusing on governance, I'll just give you one example. For instance, when Corona hit and we needed to reach the bottom half of our population who were suddenly struggling without sources of income, the Prime Minister, through his digital initiative and through his financial inclusion initiative, we had opened 400 million new bank accounts under what is called the Jan Dhan program of the Prime Minister. And we had this digital ID called Aadhaar. So we were able to combine these two and transfer the benefits in what the Prime Minister calls direct benefit transfer to the people directly without any leakages. So this is the kind of transformational governance improvements. And that underlines the popularity It is not that the popularity came first. I think it's the governance that drives the popularity. And I see a lot of that in the Philippines as well.
Interesting. And did the Prime Minister give some specific instructions to you, Ambassador, about your priorities in Manila on what the embassy here should be focusing on?
Absolutely. The sense that the Prime Minister has is that he has initiated what is called an Act East policy, moving from a look east to an Act East policy.
Interesting.
There are two elements to it. One is that we want a deeper partnership, but we also want to broaden it to include beyond economics and beyond people to people, also include security aspects to our partnership. So a broad-based partnership, and the Prime Minister feels that the Philippines can be one of the stars of the Act East policy. I believe that with your population and until the time the COVID pandemic came, the rapid economic growth that you were witnessing, and the shared values that we have as countries, as democracies, and the fact that you're so strategically located, all of this mean that for India in our Indo-Pacific framework, the Philippines is a very central player.
That's interesting. Maybe we can talk about the geopolitics first. I mean, what is the Philippines, or maybe more largely, what is ASEAN to India in terms of security, as you said? We see India as a country that has a number of common concerns than the Philippines. We have, I wouldn't mention which of your neighbors, but why does India want to get involved in this part of the world?
For one, we have a lot of shared interests. As I said, we have a very strong trade and investment links. We have a very old relationship of spirituality, of culture. We have lots of people-to-people linkages. A lot of Indians live and work here, and there's been a lot of interactions at the popular level. So we are very much a Pacific, an Indo-Pacific country in that sense. What is emerging is that our economic interests, our trade are driving this partnership. But we also feel that, as you said, from a geopolitical perspective, it's important that there is a balance as Asia develops, that every country, big or small, should have the ability to have its sovereignty and its interests represented. And therefore, we encourage ASEAN. We believe greatly in ASEAN unity and ASEAN centrality, because ASEAN is really geographically at the center of the Indo-Pacific. And a strong and cohesive ASEAN is in India's interest. And the Philippines, as a leading member, as an original member of ASEAN, as the second largest country in ASEAN, has a very, very critical role to play. So we want to see, and we would like to see it as an inclusive framework. So we believe that we should work with countries, with the United States, with Japan, with Australia, and also we have very strong ties with Russia. And we believe that all of these partnerships should contribute to a more balanced, a more open and inclusive process. And I think this is where the issues that are coming up in the contemporary context, we have a lot of synchronicity of approaches with what the Philippines is trying to do, in trying to create developmental space for itself, build a model that in the same time you're creating and consolidating your nationhood, your democracy, your state, and you're drawing on your traditional, reaching beyond the colonial period, reaching back into your culture and your rich history, crafting a new nation in a sense. And I believe that obviously in Asia, there are issues, there may be differences, but it's important that we resolve them peacefully, that we respect international law, and in particular that smaller countries do not get intimidated taking policies, into getting into relationships that are in some forms exploitative, whether it's in financial terms, whether in terms of the environment, sustainability, etc. So I think the approach broadly mirrors what ASEAN and the Philippines are doing. And India, I think, therefore, has had a very good degree of resonance in ASEAN. I think ASEAN would like to see India play a bigger role, and India would also want to play a bigger role.
Thank you, Ambassador. ASEAN was also hoping that India would join the recently concluded RCEP, this is the Regional Cooperation Economic Partnership. Of course, India did not opt to join at this time, but I think there are still, if I'm correct, there's still hopes that India would join at a later stage. Could you maybe explain to us what is India's apprehension at this time, and what would it take for India to join that partnership in the future?
So India was one of the initial countries that started the process. We were very strongly committed to it. We engaged very actively with it. And we tried very hard to convey our interest in it, but also convey our concerns about some elements of it. So we had some technical issues around, the baseline for which the tariffs would be calculated, about what would happen in terms of an import surge, and what safeguards could be initiated. So we had a set of technical issues. We would have liked to see our services sector, which is our strongest part of our economy, be able to play a larger role. But most importantly, I think there was an assessment, and there's a continuing assessment in India about how these FTAs have worked for us. While they have led to an increase in the overall levels of trade, we have consistently seen rising deficits. We have a very massive deficit with China, over $50 billion. We've had agreements with Korea and Japan, where we have deficits in that agreement. We have a $20-odd billion deficit with ASEAN. So it was not purely a matter of numbers, but it's a matter of how these agreements were, in a sense, impacting on India's own manufacturing sector. And we felt that any agreement should have a equality of benefit, and that it should allow all partners to have a share of the growth. And there was perhaps a sense that the way the agreement was crafted currently may not lend itself to that objective. So we are very, very interested in engaging with the region, and we will of course explore all possible avenues to maintain our strong economic engagement. We have been exploring various modalities. We feel also that there is a very strong case for a review of the ASEAN-India, an updating of the ASEAN-India Free Trade in Goods Agreement. And this smaller steps could build us to a point where we feel that our ability to access these markets and our openness to others moves in tandem. So it is not as though India wants to withdraw from the region. On the contrary, we want a stronger engagement. But we are just trying to convey to the region that the terms of this engagement should be of mutuality of benefit. And I think that this is something that maybe in Philippines also you would understand, because as you grow your trade, but you see that the value of the process is somewhat skewed in favor of the other countries and the impact that is having on your own economy, I think there is a case for a more calibrated approach.
What about trade with the Philippines, bilateral trade? You said that your country is one of the biggest suppliers of medicines to the Philippines. What other Indian products are you hoping to promote here?
Well, our trade in the overall ASEAN context is modest, but it's about $2.5 billion. India has a slight surplus. And we are, of course, supplying medicines. We'd also like to see greater areas of interest for both of us being explored. So in the last joint working group that we had in September, we looked at a few areas that were of interest to the Philippines and of interest to us, and we are exploring the possibility of a very quick and early framework, whether you call it a PTA or some other framework of mutual tariff concessions, where we can give access to each other's market to the two countries' products. From the Indian side, we'd be very keen to look at avenues for our exports, especially our agri exports, where the Philippines doesn't grow, for example, grapes, citrus fruits has been mentioned. We'd be keen to see also how we could do other products like potatoes. We've been talking about that. There are some restrictions. Bovine meat has been mentioned. So there's a whole range of agri products that we are interested in. We'd like to also see how we could have more electrical products, automotive components, engineering products, again, where India's quite strong and which contribute to the supply chain. So I think the essential idea is that we should look to opportunities where the Philippines can have products which flow into your manufacturing process. And that we, of course, remain open to more imports from the Philippines at the same time.
Right. Well, I know you've only been here a few months, but what have you noticed, or what has caught your attention in terms of our products? What would have potential in India?
One thing that is definitely of great potential is the electronics sector.
Okay.
Because I know that this is the largest industrial export for the Philippines currently. India is actually in a very great phase of dependence on imported electronic items. So we would like to have, we are encouraging the Prime Minister's personally overseeing a great push for manufacturing in India. And we have succeeded in the mobile manufacturing space, but a lot of components, etc., still come from abroad. So electronics, there's a huge manufacturing push in India. And we believe that the Philippines can have opportunities because you produce a lot of electronics items. The other area where you have advantages are in a lot of agricultural products, where you do quite well. I think there are opportunities, whether it's coffee or pineapple or things like that. I'd like to work with your government to try and explore that opportunity. Food processing in general is an area, I think one of the Filipino companies is invested in India. So what we'd like to see is this relationship, not purely in terms of trade, but also driven by investment.
Right.
So we've had, like the Ayala Group recently is invested in solar energy projects in India. There's an Indian joint venture in the Philippines which is doing distributed solar. So renewable energy could be an area. The Indian airport company GMR, which is one of the 5 top airport companies in the world, they're the ones who worked on the Cebu airport, and they also helped in the construction of the Clark airport. So so infrastructure is another area. We'd like to participate in your build. We feel there are also opportunities in the IT and software space, especially in the new areas that are coming up, whether it's artificial intelligence, the big data, in particular big data analytics, where given what has really struck me is in a very similar way to Indian children. It's a great desire on the part of the children to improve themselves through education and great family support for that process, which is very similar to India. So this is a great augury for the future, because the future is a knowledge economy, and it is in investing in our skills and reskilling and upskilling our existing workforce that we'll be able to get the maximum benefit. So I see that the digital economy, in terms of education, in terms of new areas like big data, even in terms of e-governance, where I'm happy to inform you that an Indian company is a systems integrator along with the Filipino company, the JB, for your national ID project.
Oh, okay.
The PhilSys projects, which is which is a very positive thing because, as you may be aware, India has the largest digital ID project in the world. It's called Aadhaar. It's been a great success. We'd like to replicate a lot of the other things that we've done. Indian fintech in particular is very, very strong. And for example, the GCash project in the Philippines was driven for very many years and that person continues to be part of the GCash structure by an Indian expert. So I think there are lots of opportunities in the digital space. So these are the broader context in which I would like this relationship to develop.
That's very interesting. There seems to be a lot of things going on between our country and yours, except that most of them are flying below the radar.
Right.
And we talk about the biggest news today, of course, is the pandemic, and I understand that our country is also talking to India for a possible supply of vaccine. Is that something you can talk about already?
Well, what I'd like to say on that is that India is, as you're aware, the largest producer of vaccines in the world. Before the corona vaccine came up, we do produce about 2/3 of vaccines that are distributed in the world. And obviously, as a vaccine producing country, we would be part of the discussion. I believe that the vaccine discussion, understandably, because people are so anxious, is perhaps getting a little ahead of itself. I think we should be a little more cautious and we should take a little more time. I think the Filipino government is doing very well in terms of how it's phasing it out, how it's coordinating it. I believe that some limited procurements are being initiated, which is currently the right way to go because effectively it will be a very drawn out process. It will take a year or two before we are able to really make a dent with the vaccinations. So, and it will not be a reliance on a single vaccine. I think there will be many vaccines that countries would want to use. There will be many pathways that will come in. So from the Indian side, we are very much interested to see how we can support our fellow developing countries, because the Prime Minister in a speech to the UN in September had said that the Indian vaccines would be a global public good. And that's the spirit in which we are going to engage with the Philippines also. So my sense is that there are already some discussions. In fact, just yesterday I met the head of your food and the FDA, the Food and Drug
FDA, yeah.
And I've been having some interactions also with the DFA. And I know that at least one Indian company, the Serum Institute, has a tie-up with a local company, and they are looking at distributing a US vaccine that could be manufactured in India. I think that's very promising. It seems to be a very promising vaccine. All I would say is that we'll definitely be looking to partner the Philippines, bringing in our trusted affordability and quality values, because like in generic medicines and in vaccines in general, we believe that there is also going to be a lot of focus on affordability going ahead, because it's going to be a fairly expensive process. And I think India's going to be potentially a very useful partner for the Philippines there.
Do you know if there's a timetable on when those, you mentioned the Serum Institute is looking at distributing one of the American vaccine. Is there a timetable to that?
They are working on is in the second quarter of next year. That's the best case scenario. We are hopeful that that can be met by about, let's say by about June of 2021. That would be the timetable that we're looking at. But there's also an Indian vaccine under development, which has gone into phase 3. This is by Bharat Biotech, called the Covaxin. So, and there is also potential Indian contributions to the WHO process. So we could find Indian vaccines also coming through other routes, but both Bharat Biotech and the Serum American vaccine could potentially be also available in the same time frame.
That's interesting. What's the situation in India now with the pandemic? I know most of us have been, of course, hearing mostly from the U.S. where the situation is probably the worst in the world right now. But we're also seeing Europe and seeing lockdowns. Where there's some new spike of cases in South Korea again. But what's the situation on the ground in India?
Currently, the number of infections is coming down off the peaks. We had
Uh-huh.
the peak where we were close to over 90,000 cases a day, but we are down to about half that on a consistent basis. So
Hmm.
hit the peak, and we are now on the downside of the peak. The good thing is that our recovery rate has throughout been very good. So of the 9 million cases that we've had, more 9.3, about 8.8 million cases are recovered, and the death rate is very low at about 1.3%. Actually, less than that. About 135,000 deaths have been reported due to COVID. So the mortality rate is low and the recovery rate has been high in India, and now the caseload is coming down fairly well. We just obviously have to continue to monitor it because we've opened up our economy. I think the Prime Minister led from the front. We went in very early for a lockdown, and that did hit us economically quite intensely, as would be expected. But since then, we've had a progressive opening up, and we've seen the economy recovering. So initially, we had this slogan where we said, if you are alive, then you're able to capture the world, which is jaan hai to jahan hai. But then the Prime Minister modified that to say ki jaan bhi jahan bhi, which means that you safeguard your life, but you also work for your livelihood. So that's the model. And the interesting and the most inspiring thing coming out of this is how the Prime Minister was able to create a mass campaign mentality. Everybody felt that they should participate. As in a large and diverse and somewhat where we have pockets of underdevelopment, it is not always easy to bring people out to a common cause. But I think the country has responded very well. We did have that continuing number of cases, but at no point did we feel that we were going to be overwhelmed by it, because we used the lockdown to create the health capacities that were required. And so when we had that rise, which was expected when the lockdown eased, we were able to treat our people. And from an importer of PPEs, we are now one of the largest producers of PPEs. Our medicines have been sent to 150 countries, half of them on grant basis. So not only were we able to meet our requirements for medicines, and even the United States, everywhere, treatment is being based on medicines that are sourced from India throughout this pandemic. And we are happy to supply even the Philippines. Of course, the treatment protocols have changed from time to time. We started with hydroxychloroquine, etc. Then now we are at remdesivir. At all these stages, including currently with the Philippines, we are supplying remdesivir to the Philippines. So,
okay. So you are our source.
we are. So we obviously, as you rightly said, we are perhaps a little under the radar on these things. But one of the things I would like to do as part of my assignment is using platforms like the Manila Times to have a more informed discussion about a relationship and the potential for doing more. I think there's a lot more that can be done on the health side.
Like you said, the Indians in the Philippines are also contributing quite a bit to the economy, but like our relationship, they're also under the radar. They do things very quietly. In fact, not a lot of Filipinos know that many of the well-known brands in the Philippines are distributed by Indians, Filipinos. But maybe you can tell us more. Maybe you should be. You're the one. You should tell us about the community here, because not a lot of Filipinos know that they are very active, but very quiet.
Yes, so we have it's not one of our largest overseas communities, but it's a significant number.
Yes.
Estimated about 130 to 140,000 people, which includes, interestingly, one of the largest student communities, perhaps the single largest foreign student community in the Philippines. There are 15,000 Indian students who study medicine in Filipino private colleges. So this is one section of our community here. And the other community is, as you said, there are people from India who are in the trading business. They've been active for quite many decades here. Many of those families came to the Philippines in the early decades of the 20th century, some even in the last year of the 19th. And they have stayed on, and they have created businesses here which are continuing to thrive. The Philippines provides a very, shall we say, conducive business environment for these Indians, and we are really appreciative of that. And they also contribute very effectively, especially to charity and other activities, including, I was reading just yesterday that for the corona vaccine that you're contracting, among the private partners who are buying some of it is the Philippines Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industries. That's the trading community. Then you have a lot of Indians who've come in over a period of time who basically work in the microfinance sector in the Philippines, and they've of course sometimes been subject to some criticism, but I think that they provide a financial service to the bottom half of the Filipino population who might find it very difficult to access the formal banking sector. So this is another big chunk. And then a very interesting chunk which I see in Manila are the Indian expats who work in international companies like Unilever or Citibank, Sun Financial. Various companies have Indian expat managers. There's a good number of Indians working in the ADB. So it's a very varied community. It's not a single profession, single objective community. But one or two wonderful things about them is that, of course, they're very law-abiding and productive community. You wouldn't find them in areas of, where there are any concerns for the Philippine society or the state. And they're also a wonderful link that connects India with the Philippines and also Philippines with the world. But as I was saying, like these Indian IT companies that come in, IT services companies, they're employing over 100,000 Filipinos, making India potentially the single largest source of employment for Filipinos. Indian companies are the single largest. But the beauty of it is that not more than 2% of all the employees in these companies are Indian. So this is true even with a company like GMR, where I mentioned they've constructed all these projects, but their staff strength in the Philippines has never been more than 3 or 4%. So the Indian model is really to look at working with local communities and local skills, rather than bringing in our people just because we are funding a project or otherwise. We want to try and create value that is sustainable and value that involves the local community. So we would like the same in India, and there's no reason why we should do it differently in the Philippines. And this is how I think our investments perhaps are not projected in that way, because they look and they should feel Filipino, because it is in the Philippines that they're operating.